we are based here in Brussels to not only enable exchange of practices between our members, because our members have a lot of experience to work with local partners on concrete projects to strengthen democratic structures. So the main idea of ENoP is to facilitate dialogue on democracy support. And also one of our key mandates is to do policy advocacy towards the EU institutions. And you could find this study in front of you, which we have drafted over the last 2 years. It was quite an effort with altogether 2 lead authors and 5 country authors. And we thought it is very important to focus on this issue of cooperation between political parties and civil society. Why? Because we see, of course, the context of shrinking spaces, the context of disinformation, where governments and civil society and political parties come more and more under pressure. And we very much believe as ENoP that to have a strong civic and political participation in a country, you need, on the one side, strong political parties, and you need strong civil society organizations. But very often, in many country contexts, they do not really cooperate. And we very much, with this study, of course, would encourage cooperation, because there are joint benefits and there is a joint interest of political parties and civil society organization, in our view, to work together where it is of mutual benefit. So our study actually looked at altogether 5 countries, and we ask ourselves the question, one from Latin America, Bolivia, 2 from Africa, Benin and Kenya, and 2 from Southeast Asia, Cambodia and the Philippines. And we, on the one side, wanted to look at the question of course, political environment. How does the political environment enable political parties and civil society organizations to cooperate? Is there any kind of cooperation? How do political parties perceive themselves? How do civil society organizations perceive themselves? If there is no enabling environment, is there at all a chance of cooperation? In which areas could civil society organizations and parties work together? And we very much believe that, especially when it comes to strengthening democracies, those actors should mutually reinforce each other. And this is basically what we want to talk about today. And therefore, we have invited the lead author, Willi Hoffmeister, former colleague of mine at Konrad Adenauer Foundation. He has been working on democracy and political party support since 30 years, has published a huge number of books, especially on how to strengthen political parties in third countries, and also is the author of this study. And of course, we have then country chapters, and the country authors also here available online. I also would like to thank all of you for being here tonight, also the guests who are online. And we will allow, of course, later for some questions and answers directly to our country authors and to our colleague here. I would just like to mention at the beginning that we started this cooperation with one lead author, Mr. Peter Köppinger. He has been working in Cambodia and in the Philippines, in many other parts of the world for Konrad Adenauer Foundation. He was a very esteemed colleague, and he unfortunately died on Corona while writing this study. And Willi took over from him, and I just would like to mention this because his passion and his mission was to strongly work together with local partners to listen to their challenges, their needs, and to try to develop solutions for local needs. And he did this in a very humble way. And yeah, so it was very tragic that he could not finalize this study, and therefore we also dedicated the preface to him. So this is at the beginning of the publication. Willi, we have been working for so long on the issue of not only political party support, but where do you see joint let's say, benefits of political parties and civil society organizations to cooperate. Why should they cooperate? Especially in the current global context, but also in country-specific context, and why there is so much also very often not only polarization, but also division of interest between civil society and political parties. In some countries, we could see they hardly talk to each other because they very much stick to their specific roles. So I would be interested to get a bit of an overview of your overall findings in the study, the overall recommendations you would give also to the international community on how in the future this cooperation can be encouraged if the environment, the political environment is of course enabling. So Willy, I'm giving the floor to you for some first overviews.
Well, to answer very quickly your question, why they should cooperate? Because democracy needs cooperation of all democratic forces. Parties cannot do it alone. They need also other organizations committed to democracy. But before now trying to give you a little bit more meat to your question, I first want to express my gratitude for having been invited to participate in this very interesting project. My thanks are for you, Denis, and also for the team of ENoP, and of course also to the co-authors. We had a very fruitful cooperation when they drafted their papers, and we discussed the papers and the findings. So I was very pleased and honored to participate in this project also, because it's a project, as you mentioned, in memory now, unfortunately, to Peter, because he could not finish the project. He had initiated this project because of his commitment with parties and civil society organizations. Well, now trying to give you a little bit more elements with regard to your question. We had seen after the big change of the international system in the 90s that democracy was developing very well all over the place in many countries. We had this third wave of democracy, which started also in this, already in the 70s, but only in the 90s we had a very huge wave of pro-democratic movements in Eastern and Southeast Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. It started a little bit earlier with a return of democratic governments after the authoritarian and military governments during the 70s and 80s. However, unfortunately, since around about 15 years, we have to observe a kind of decay, democratic recession. This was the first observation by some authors, and then we can clearly say that since around 15 years, unfortunately, this pro-democratic movement, this international pro-democratic movement, is on a very complicated moment. If we look to these studies that observe democratic development, Freedom House, International IDEA, the project in Göteborg University, Democracy, and others. So all the findings indicate that unfortunately authoritarian or non-democratic rule is gaining space in many countries, and democracy is on decay. So we have to ask, why is democracy at such a poor situation actually? And then we will, of course, very quickly find out that political parties have a lot to do with this problem of democracy, because democracy depends not at least on political parties. They have to offer special functions to the development of democracy, and actually many political parties are not able to offer these pro-democratic functions in their countries. We have a kind of problem of representation in many countries, so many people do not feel anymore represented by political parties. And on the other side, many parties do not exactly know whom they represent. So they have lost the link to societies. We know that in earlier times, at least in the European context, many political parties came out of such called social cleavages. But in nowadays, these social cleavages and this linkage is to with political parties and society do not exist anymore. And though parties have lost the link to society, we see a fragmentation of party systems. We see the founding of many new parties. Probably never in history we had so many parties as today in Europe, but also in nearly everywhere where it is easy to build political parties. We have a spread of political parties, which is incredible. But on the other hand, we have a decreasing number of people committed to political party, members of political party. All the new parties and all the old parties have very few members. The old parties, the big old parties, have lost a lot of members, and the new parties are not able to gain. There are some new parties like the Greens in Germany also, which have gained some additional members, but in general, and we have a high level of mistrust in political parties. We see, if you look to the Eurostat statistics here for Europe, it's really surprising the level of mistrust in political parties in Europe. And if we are looking to other regions, then we can see that the mistrust is even higher. So in many countries, there's practically no trust. If you have 7-8% of trust into political parties, you can say nobody is really trusting in political parties. So there is a huge gap between political parties and their society. And therefore, it is necessary that parties must look to rebuild the link with their societies. And this, I think, in this regard, civil society organizations can play a very important role. And therefore, it is really pertinent that ENoP was looking, or is looking, not only in the context of this study, but also in the context of other activities, as I know, is looking for building new linkages between political parties and civil society organizations. We know that some of the Western political parties have been built in close relationship to certain civil society organizations. This is especially true for the trade unions, which had traditionally been linked to the more social democratic socialist parties and so. But in nowadays, this link also got lost in many countries because of the change of social context. The traditional trade unions that do not exist anymore. We have still a lot of trade unions, of course, but their traditional self-understanding does not exist anymore, has changed a lot. The character of the industrial worker has changed. The commitment of the employees have changed. Traditionally, they felt automatically committed to their social organization, to their trade union. And via this commitment, they had been mobilized in favor of certain political parties. And this does not exist also anymore. In ancient times, let me say, in the Nordic countries as well as in Great Britain, we know that trade unions had built part of political parties. So automatically, they brought a lot of people into the political parties and they co-decided on party affairs. But this does not exist anymore, though we have also this aspect weakening. And as our study shows, in many such called new democracies, this kind of linkage never existed. We have many parties which are not built out of social cleavages, because these kind of social cleavages we had in Western countries did not exist in many countries in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, a little bit more in ancient times, but today also not anymore. So the parties are coming out of other motives, and many of the parties, although in these countries, do not have a real root, a strong root in their societies. So, but again, to strengthen democracy, I think it's very important to bring parties together with the people, because they should represent people. They should know what the people are thinking. And in this context, civil society organizations play a very important role. The problem, however, is that they do not talk to each other, or they do not talk enough to each other. And therefore, we are also asking in our study, how can we foster cooperation and dialogue between political parties and civil society organizations, because this is a very necessary element for the re-strengthening of democratic developments all over the world.
Thank you very much, Willi, for this first analysis. You said, why should civil society organizations work with political parties when they see that there's no real legitimacy, that there's shrinking trust in political actors? So can you give me some reasons for why civil society organizations should or lose their independence, their autonomy? What should be the added value of civil society organizations to engage with parties?
Well, I do not say they will lose their autonomy. They should not lose their autonomy. This is very important that they continue to be independent and that they have their own point of view, as individual people have their own point of view, and they will bring in, hopefully, in many societies, we have a lot of civil society organizations, not only a certain kind of organizations. Of course, we have in many countries, we have civil society organizations. Many of them are not really interested in political affairs, or they are not interested to work together with political parties because they are attending other issues. Yeah? And of course, we have even strong civil society organizations, which are in some countries even, let me say, not very helpful to democracy, yeah? Or even problematic to democracy. We have religious organizations, we have social organizations, we have a lot of different organizations who are not necessarily committed with democratic values. But of course, we have a lot of organizations who represent justified social interest in society, and in many cases it is necessary that this social interest has to be articulated towards politics, and that political parties should, in their function of aggregation and articulation of social interest, they should know what society is thinking, what are the requests of society, and therefore they need a contact to civil society organization. And civil society organizations have to be, at least those who are working in the political area, they have to be a little bit more creative, yeah, and proactive to come into contact with political parties, which is also not so easy.
Yeah, before we go and pass the floor to our country experts, and I would like to also know what is in for political parties to engage more with civil society organizations. I mean, on the one hand, we can hopefully expect that civil society organization can bring in certain political issues, and they find alignment or partners in their specific thematic issues to then also to bring their demands into legislative proposals. So we can, of course, see this need for civil society organizations to lobby political parties on certain interests. We also have a lot of examples where civil society organizations train political parties because they have more thematic depth. They work on specific issues, and then they would help to build capacity for political parties. But again, I'm really curious to hear now from later on from our country authors, is this the reality on the ground in countries where, of course, there are authoritarian tendencies, where there is a shrinking of democratic space, of course, and where, of course, opposition parties might be, let's say, more the ally of CSOs and not the authoritarian regimes, because opposition parties somehow represent the will of most civil society organizations. So I think in most authoritarian countries or semi-authoritarian regimes, civil society organizations very often fighting for human rights, social issues, find their allies in the opposition.
No, this is a very interesting indicator where civil society organizations are persecuted by the regime. This indicates that they are putting their fingers in a special area, in a problematic area. So, and you can see that civil society organizations in some places are substituting political parties, because normally the political parties should be those who are putting the fingers in the bounding or in the problem of democracy. They don't do it, but civil society organizations do it and are persecuted in nowadays in many countries, even in such called democratic advanced society. So the environment for civil society organizations has become very complicated in many countries. Political parties need this contact if they want to defend democracy. I think they need allies in this effort to defend democracy, and civil society as well as media. Of course, democratically organized or oriented media must be or should be natural allies of political parties. And on the other hand, this is an issue of representations. Parties should know what people are thinking. And if parties do not have their own links, their own instruments, how to come together with society, so they should, of course, try to get closer contact, into a closer contact with civil society organizations who represent, each organization represent part of society, and therefore parties should benefit from this kind of links of civil society to real society. And this will hopefully help political parties to reach out to broader parts of society, and then it will help them to get more votes, because this is, of course, one of the main functions of political parties. They want to gain elections, and they need voters, and civil society organizations can bring them voters.
Thank you, Willy. I think we can maybe go to Southeast Asia, because it's already quite late there. And if I would like to choose, I would start with Cambodia, with Mr. Schrey Sobiak, with your assessment and presentation in a country which has been ruled for many decades by one party, so to say, under a multi-party democratic, at least constitution. If you assess the situation in Cambodia and the relation of, or the self-perception of civil society, of political parties, do you see room for cooperation, or is the context so challenging that actually also especially civil society and the ruling party would rather not cooperate, and civil society and the opposition party, I think, have more things in common? So maybe you can give us some assessment and thoughts from Cambodia.
Okay, thank you very much, and good night from here from Cambodia for both of you and Willy. And I'm very honored to be invited to join this project, very interesting project. And my friend Peter Koppinger, the late, have done so much for this country, for the civil society. So I dedicated my presentation, one part, to him as well. I fully agree that whenever political parties and civil society work together, the people, especially youth, profit from that. Cambodia is divided in terms of administrative division from the capital city and down to the provincial level, the district, the commune, and the village. There's two elections in Cambodia. One is a national election to elect the MPs, but another one is also important, and it's happened this year, is commune council election. The election law in Cambodia has been written in such a way that at the commune level, it creates seats, commune councillors for different political parties to work all together as a commune councillors. And it has been running very well at that level. I said that the cooperation between civil society and political parties, when it works very well, it changes the dynamic of the political life of the party. In 2013, Cambodia, as you said, is run by almost one political party, Our prime minister is a prime minister for more than 30 years alone. So it says something about that. But in 2013, the former opposition party, the main opposition party, got almost 50% of popular vote. Why? Because the cooperation they extended to civil society. It means youth organization, unions, teachers association have been mobilizing a lot of popular vote to support the opposition party. And it was the clear indicator that to the ruling party, whenever civil society work with the opposition party, the ruling party is threatened for their power. That's why, you know, in 2014, there was an attempt to dialogue, we call it the culture of dialogue, between the ruling party and the opposition party. It went very well for a few months, but later on, it was reluctant. So it led to another election in 2017, confirming that that opposition party still keep almost 50% of the vote. And it was from that position that the ruling party and the government use the court to dissolve the main opposition party. So this is the reality of Cambodia. And after the main opposition party was dissolved by the Supreme Court, the civil society, you know, the government come out with a law we call Lango, the law to organize the NGO, the civil society and association and so on. And the law specifically prohibit the civil society from having any political activities. And from that time, we can say that the well-designed, the well-practiced cooperation between political party and civil society is somehow interrupted. There's no more direct link. There was a lot of harassment, intimidation by the local administration to civil society, especially to those working in the area of good governance, of democratic process, human rights, or election. And that's why people now fear among civil society leaders, you know, if they cooperate with the political party, it means that they would have a big trouble. Many activists of political parties, many leaders of civil societies who are involved in advocacy, strong advocacy, human rights, and so on, are put in jail. And one of the famous union leaders, a woman, you know, after she come from a conference in Australia, has been detained and now put in jail also. So all this create a feeling that politics at the civil society is something that we should not touch. And now, next year is very important. July 2023 is the year that Cambodia will have a legislative election. And the years also that the current prime minister has decided to handle the prime minister position to his son. And now all the position of minister position, secretary of state position are prepared for a younger generation, but those younger leaders are all of them sons, daughters of the current leaders. But anyway, you know, it would be very interesting to see that the main opposition party, the candlelight party, whatever intimidation, harassment, fear, and so on, they decided to engage in that election. And this morning, I have heard that the European Union has provided substantial grant to civil society working in democratic process and election for next year, up to 2 million euro. And this is a real push because now Cambodia has a very young population. You know, this year to 2022, there's more than 2.5 million voters, registered voters, who have decided not to vote. But this year, today is the end of the official registration process. People come to vote more than 100%. It was unexpected. So the level of interest among youth, among new voters are coming back because a lot of civil society are working on the ground to promote that. I think that this is a new dynamic in Cambodia, and I believe that next year national election will see a lot of turnout, especially among youth. Would the grant from the European Commission, to those civil society working on election would change something? I believe so, especially an education process to voters to participate, to understand the process, information sharing, participation in pre-election, during election time, during voting and proclamation of result and so on. That would change drastically the situation. And I think that this is the occasion, the opportunity for political party and civil society to work together for the benefit of the people on the ground. So I think that although the political situation is tense, although fear, harassment, intimidations are practiced everywhere, but youths, because of social network, especially Facebook and so on, are communicated among themselves, create group through signals or through Telegram and so on, sharing information about who is who, about who doing what. Civil society are very proactive on social media. So I think that civil society now has tried to regroup their voice to have a common ground. The situation from the perspective of political party depend on one point only. If next year election see the main opposition party regain some seats in the National Assembly, I think that the new momentum for cooperation between political parties and civil society is renewed. And that I see a lot of hope and a lot of new area for cooperation between the two.
Thank you very much, Sofiak, to review a little bit the history of the democratic development in Cambodia, shrinking spaces again after opening in 2013 with a huge success in elections. And then, of course, the use of electoral law, political party law to restrict opposition again, to even not allow certain parties to run for elections. And now we have, it seems, a kind of a new momentum for the elections taking place next year. But we still see that the government is of course trying to limit space, and nevertheless civil society seems to be reawakening and seeing opportunities to also change and to re-engage. But at the end, from my limited experience in Cambodia, it was always that once the opposition became too strong, there were measures put in place not to let them grow too strong. So let's see how the situation is moving. And thank you for, of course, your specific case and for mentioning again that the active political civil society is engaged a lot with the opposition. We have to also be honest, there are a lot of social organizations in Cambodia which historically work with the government and to promote the government's agenda. So if I may say, also civil society in Cambodia is somehow polarized, unfortunately, because it is kindly very much tendency towards opposition or ruling party, at least from my experience. So I think we can go to the Philippines, to Julio. Interesting case. We had, of course, we have also a multi-party democracy, but we have a different political system. We have a lot of changes in power now, new president. It would be interesting to see. I mean, civil society in the Philippines was flourishing quite well. There was a free media space. Things have changed over the Duterte years, we know, But in
Right.
principle, how do you assess the situation in your country with regard to cooperation, especially? How does it work, and is there cooperation happening?
Okay, so again, thank you very much. Good afternoon from London, where I am currently a visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Thank you very much for having me. And again, on behalf of my co-author, Carmel Abao, I'd like to thank the European Network of Political Foundations for this opportunity to share our research. And again, I'd like to thank Willie Hofmeister. Of course, we've worked in other projects as well, and of course, the late Peter Koppinger for the initial inspiration for this project. I have a quick presentation, so I'd like to share just to give you because a lot have happened since the time we prepared this research, this output. So I'd just like to give some elaboration of what we have contributed in the publication and some updates on what has happened in the Philippines thus far. So the title of our presentation has a subtitle, a two-level game, of course, with all due respect to Robert Putnam, who initially applied the concept of two-level game in the international relations. Of course, we all know that in most cases, political parties are confined within the state, contesting power within the state through elections. Well, generally, society is the realm of social movements. And in between the space between political parties and social movements, the state and society is the democratic space in which most civil society organizations like NGOs and interest groups operate. As you have said, in the Philippines, we are considered to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest democracy in the region, particularly in Southeast Asia. We have a long history of party politics and election. But despite over a century of party politics, a history of several party systems, and a multitude of parties, the Philippines still suffers from a seeming lack of institutionalization and political development at that. So majority of our political parties are clientelistic, patronage-based, populist. In the Philippines, it is clans, not parties, that have been the building block. We have the highest percentage of political dynasties elected in our legislature. Around 70% of our Congress is composed of political dynasties. Now, the most progressive organizations are confined to the left or the extreme left, particularly those gravitating around the oldest Maoist insurgency in the world, the last remaining Maoist insurgency led by the Communist Party of the Philippines and some of its allied legal organizations, which are now under attack from the far right. And there's a growing swing towards the far right in the Philippines in the past few decades. But then again, the Philippines has also had a long and rich tradition of civil society organizations that were forged during the struggle against the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. And we have a long struggle, and for the longest time, the Philippines was the model for civil society activism in the region, and with intermediary functions such as trade unions, business associations, and non-governmental organizations. However, since the fall of the Marcos dictatorship in 1986, in the 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, which actually ushered in that period of democratization in the region and the world, basing on Sam Huntington's concept of two election tests. If you have two consecutive election and peaceful transfer of power, you are on your way to democratic consolidation. Since the EDSA 1986 People Power Uprising, we have had two smooth transfer of power in 1992 and 1998. However, a series of political scandals, corruption issues, and the like resulted in a long period of legitimation crisis from 2004 until the present. No? And this led to several controversies that led to a politics of anger and frustration for people, particularly in the middle class, who felt that democratization did not deliver on its promise of development. And of course, similar to the rest of the world, in which frustration and anger resulted in the rise of populism and illiberalism. And of course, with the past 6 years under the Duterte administration, this paved the way for further illiberalism and attack on human rights, media freedom, and democracy in general. And basing on the varieties of democracy index, we have definitely, our democracy has suddenly suffered, from this attack from the populists and the illiberalists. So what resulted was, of course, the Duterte chapter in the Philippines is just a prelude to the second coming of the Marcos dynasty. So on the 50th anniversary of the declaration of martial law by the former president and dictator Ferdinand Marcos, the incumbent president just elected earlier this year is another Marcos, the son and namesake of the late dictator. Of course, he has won democratically. He is the first majority president in the post-Marcos period. The first majority president in the post-Marcos period is a Marcos. So that is one historical irony. And people are hoping that he will not turn out to be his father. But looking at the framework introduced by the Greek political scientist Takis Papas, this is the reverse version, the opposite mirror of Sam Huntington's two election tests. If you have two populists successfully being elected, then you probably are on the way to becoming a populist-based democracy rather than a consolidated liberal democracy. So in the Philippines, I don't have enough time to explain this, but you have this disconnect between elite politics operating within the political party system, and then you have the mass-based civil society organization working on the ground level. And of course, it depends on the balance of political power between these two levels, between these two actors, between the party-based actors and the civil society actors. And the ideal combination, of course, the ideal calculus is that you must have at least a strengthened civil society, but at the same time, a strengthened party system, institutionalized and reform-based party system. Or else you might end up with just the same old dynastic politics, or worse, populism or celebrity politics, in which we have actors and sports personalities being elected to power. Now, we are now involved in this project that tries to tie up civil society, academia, and other sectors of society with political parties in order to push for important reforms in the country. So our idea is that we must have robust institutions for political participation and reforms. And this should empower, this includes, this should involve empowered and engaged citizens. And the objective is really to fix our system, particularly our electoral system, because one cannot fix our party system if we do not attempt to fix our electoral system. The objective, again, is to have competitive elections and greater accountability in leadership selection. In doing so, we hope to have democratic governance strengthened and eventually to have inclusive, robust, and sustainable development. We have 3 strategic pillars in which civil society and political parties and other sectors of Philippine society can come together and work for this common goal, despite the challenges to democracy and the shrinking democratic space. One strategic pillar is, of course, knowledge management. We're doing that right now. The second is education and capacity building. And the third is advocacy and consortium building. Now, the third is very important because this is the actual political action that is necessary. Building coalition, building consortiums for democracy, and trying to get as broad support in order to push for the necessary institutional, political, and electoral reforms. In the Philippines.
Julio, may I ask you to come closely to an end because we have 2 more presentations.
Okay.
So that would be great. Thanks.
Sorry. Okay, I'll just cut this. Of course, we need to promote civil citizen party linkages. I'd like to end by saying that there is currently a big effort right now, and this is we have launched a 3-year project called Participate, which is a non-partisan pro-democracy coalition dedicated to engage and empower the political participation of the Filipino people. It is a consortium of the main universities in the Philippines, the Ateneo School of Government, the Southern Institute of Governance, and the Code NGO, which is the largest consortium of development NGOs, plus NAMFREL, the oldest electoral watchdog in the country. So right now, we are trying to push for necessary reforms, and here are the major reform areas on political party reforms, electoral reforms, constitutional reforms, and multi-level governance. We are supported by donors from international and domestic sources, and hopefully our current funding cycle is about to end. So hopefully, if the European Union can also help us in pushing for the necessary reform, because the Philippines is one of the last democracies standing in Southeast Asia. So we should do our best to at least keep the democratic space that we have. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking so much.
No, thank you very much, Julio. This is really interesting, especially to have this very concrete project. And I think we should definitely stay in touch to see how this is implemented. And I would be really interested to learn more how political parties are engaged in this project, and how do you encourage them to participate, and also how responsive are they to this kind of cooperation. I think we can maybe also respond to this later, but it seems that the EU is already somehow starting to foster this cooperation through such initiatives. So it's really well noted. And I think it would be important to map such initiatives and also to learn from them. So very interested to re-engage with you on the experiences you have in implementing this project, but we can discuss it later. I would like now to hand over to our colleague from Kenya, Maurice Luca Fonton, to briefly reflect on the situation in Benin. Sorry, not in Kenya. So we start with Benin and then we go to Kenya, and situation in Benin is probably again completely different to Cambodia and to the Philippines. But I give the floor to you maybe for 5 minutes, and please focus a little bit on the political framework, the enabling environment for parties and civil society, and is there a potential for cooperation between the 2 actors, and what are the constraints and the benefits? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I only have 5 minutes. I had a presentation, but I don't think I'll have time now to go through it. So just as a summary, there have been some little changes between the time we did the study and today, especially in terms of number of political parties, and also in terms of collaboration between political parties and civil society organizations. Because unfortunately in Benin, since the 1990s until 2016, the collaboration between civil society organizations and political parties was fine. And even before the elections of 2006, there was a kind of common protest, joint common protest between political parties and civil society against the change of the constitution. And that worked well because at the end of the day, they were able to succeed and the constitution was not changed. And the same thing happened also, I think in 2011. But unfortunately, since 2016, there's been a kind of decline of civil societies and also the relation between civil society and the political parties, because most of the famous political civil society actors before 2016 shift into politics. So they lost the confidence of the credibility and also people confidence in them. So that affected civil society and also the relationship between civil society and political parties. But thanks God, since the last 2 years, there's been a kind of light in that environment. The new civil society actors are now trying to work again with political parties, and they're trying to do activities together. For instance, there have been a new reform in the in the electoral code, giving reserved seats to women, and civil society are now working to promote women political participation. Moreover, they're also working to promote persons with disabilities participation. Seems like you have a question for me. Okay,
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So they're working to promote women political participation, and first they're working to promote the women political participation within political parties first, because while discussing with political parties, the situation is that political parties do want to recruit women, but women don't want to join parties. So that's been a work civil society organizations have been doing so far. And the next step is to have those reserved seats also for the communal elections. So the next communal elections are going to be 2026, and that year will be the year of general elections Benin. Next month, January, there will be the first elections after the 2019 election, when we saw violence outbreak during the election for the first time in Benin. And so next year, the challenge is to have political parties and civil society organizations working together to have peaceful elections. So what we can envision in terms of collaboration with donors, especially the EU, is for us to think about capacity building of civil society actors and trying to make them independent, because when they are not independent and when they need to get funding from either private sources or like unknown sources, then they're no longer independent and they need to do what the donor is asking them to do. And that's what happened, unfortunately, in the country before 2016. That's something I mentioned in the study, the Paris remote. The Paris remote, that's a phrase we use here to point out the funding, the financial, let's say the financial support of civil societies and political parties from unknown source. I mean, it's officially an unknown source, but everyone knows what the source was. So just to keep in the 5 minutes, that's what I want to say. Maybe when we come to the Q&A sessions, I can elaborate more.
No, thank you very much. I mean, we have, of course, the case studies here, and also we will have 4 engagement sessions with the EU delegations in the 4 countries. So we will re-engage to discuss case by case in the specific countries, the challenges and problems. So we have a bit more time to address individual country issues in more length. This is just to inform you about this. So we will engage with the delegation in the Philippines, in Cambodia, in also Benin and Kenya and Bolivia. In any case, I think cooperation is possible. It's happening on electoral reform quite a bit, if I understand correctly. In Benin, there's capacity needed on both sides. To help, I think, reforming the electoral code or to work on specific issues on electoral reform. But it seems that cooperation is possible. And as in Cambodia, we heard cooperation was mainly together with the opposition party. We can talk a little bit about, is cooperation of civil society focusing more on specific political parties, or do they cooperate with everybody? So it's always interested to see what kind of allies civil society organizations try to find in specific country to also put or bring their political or their agenda, their specific agenda forward, because a lot of civil society organizations are one thematic organizations which focus on climate, on human rights, and very much, of course, push for their own agendas and need political parties as allies to bring their agendas forward. So now the last but not least case is Kenya. Yavas, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Please, the floor is yours to give us some insights on Kenya.
Thank you so much, Denis. I hope that's how you pronounce it.
Yes, perfect.
Great. I really appreciate to join all of you today and my colleagues. Now, I would like to say that, as we all understand, politics in itself is very participatory in nature, and democracy and democratic practice in Kenya has become more exciting, especially in the recent times, coming with the new constitution that Kenyans enacted in 2010. Political parties are very significant pillars in the democratic framework and space of Kenya. They play a very fundamental role. But this role is not just left to political parties alone. The nexus and interlinks between political parties, civil society organizations, and various experts in the governance space, as well as media, are very key pillars in Kenya's democratic space. Now, as of the period that we were concluding this study, around May 2021, for instance, we had about 73 fully registered political parties. And by the time we were getting to elections, we were about 85 fully registered political parties. Yet, not all these political parties get to make a strong showing during the general election. Very few of them. And then looking at the legal framework in Kenya, we also have got the opportunity for coalition building by political parties that feel ideologically inclined. But we have come to the appreciation that ideology in itself does not play a critical role in the formation of political coalitions in Kenya. But the great desire for political parties just to come together for the mere desire to win power. And that is why there is no single political coalition that has lived beyond one election cycle. After one election cycle, those political coalitions always disintegrate, and those political parties that had formed the initial coalition get to form another coalition, even with other parties that they were not initially working together. And this brings to the fact that the fact to the table that then ideology is not the primary driving force of coalition building amongst political parties in Kenya. When it comes to civil society organizations, we have got about 15,000 registered civil society organizations in Kenya. Of these 15,000 civil society organizations, about 1,000 of them, I would say, are within the governance space, but still just only about 200 or 250 of them are very active within the national governance politics and mechanisms. And factually speaking is that political parties have in the past, especially after during the 2002 elections, a very clear, critical election that drove out of power KANU, the Kenya African National Union, a party that had led the country since independence in 1963. The political parties and government of the time poached or picked various key or leading individuals from various civil society organizations to form the government. Some members became principal secretaries, some members became cabinet ministers, etc. Interestingly, even those key members of civil society who are co-opted into government, some of them were found with corruption cases later on. Yet they were known advocates for anti-corruption, good governance, accountability, and transparency. Interestingly too, that various political parties that have campaigned on the platform of anti-corruption in all these coalitions in 2002, even in 2007, even in 2013, nearly, in fact, not nearly every government bringing together various political parties have always had corruption scandals in less than a year of taking power. Yet most of those parties campaign on anti-corruption, transparency, and open governance frameworks. And so I think moving forward, and even as we looked at in this study, the partnership between political parties, civil society organizations, and media, because media is a major partner. And in Kenya, the other pillar that is emerging as very strong is the independent governance experts, who are seen as critical voices that are depended on by political parties, by even civil society organizations and media, to give the other critical opinion that is technically, you can say, non-aligned to political maybe ideologies or within that are not within political parties. But I think what is emerging, and as the recommendations of this study are, is that there is need for stronger support and partnerships. And this support should go, one, to political parties, two, to civil society organizations, because one major challenge that civil society organizations have is that there is the fear of profiling of civil society organizations by political parties. Civil society organizations that are deemed to be inclined to a particular political party get to be profiled and disadvantaged, and in fact, even, or of course, given a bad name, if at all the party and the coalition they were supporting does not win power. And so to this period, this moment, even in the election that just concluded in August, civil society organizations and media are extremely cautious and shy, even to criticize, one, the government of the day, to criticize and call out even leading political parties and political leaders who are engaging in doublespeak. And so the support that this study easily recommends and recommended is that there is need to create a broader or a broad-based support that brings together political parties, civil society organizations, media, and governance experts through media platforms that can engage in very expansive civic engagement and education processes. Because one thing is that we have got an existing platform that brings together political parties that also is a space that's shared by civil society organizations under the an umbrella of Center for Multi-Party Democracy. Trouble is that the moment political parties or coalition gets into power, they put aside the civil society organizations. Like, for example, today, the Kenya Kwanza administration, a coalition that won power in August, does not so much value input from civil society organizations. So then civil society organizations find themselves easily working with the opposition, and those opposition parties find credibility in information, research, and content from civil society organizations. Today in Kenya, some certain leading media houses are downsizing their staff because they're not even getting support through advertisements from government agencies, because they were seen to be aligned to certain political parties during the campaigns. And so this becomes a growing challenge for media and civil society organizations. So I think there is need for more partnership and support, especially from ENoP, that political parties, and especially civil society organizations within the governance space and governance experts to see how to create stronger pillars for democratic practice in Kenya, whether a party or a coalition win power or they remain in the opposition.
Thank you very much, Javas, for this description of the situation in your country. Yeah, it seems that it's a bit tricky for civil society actors to ally with political parties who might then, but it's interesting also to see that a lot of civil society actors have joined parties at one, but then they were not always more accountable or cleaner than the parties themselves. So that's also interesting to see in how far people change, and once they get into power, of course, they might be tracked by the political system, and so I think that's interesting to hear this from Kenya, and also the call for more cooperation. I think every political party has to decide, of course, with whom they want to engage and with which civil society organizations they cooperate, because it depends a little bit also on topics. Yeah, so I think not all political parties are kind of having the same political agendas, and so it means that certain civil society organizations who push for certain thematic areas are not automatically an ally of all political parties. So I think we have to also make this differentiation. I guess, for example, the Green Party in Germany works a lot with environmental associations, NGOs. The Christian Democrats, we are more inclined to work also with actors like employees associations, but also the church, or we have other civil society actors. So I think there's also sometimes a more let's say common ground for political parties to work with some actors, but when it comes to the reform of the democratic system, I think then political civil society organizations, of course, should push and try to engage with everyone. But in many countries, of course, especially the ruling parties, they are not very often interested to really reform the governance system in the country, because they very much know if they change the system, it is to their own, so it has a detrimental effect to them. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Yasmina, I know that Willy wants to come in, but Yasmina, who was coordinating this study and who is working within ENoP as the coordinator for this publication. I know you have been working also a lot with political parties in Southeastern Europe and in the European neighborhood. Maybe you would like to share some experiences also from your perspective, Yasmina.
Thank you, Denis, for the opportunity, and thank you to all the authors for their invaluable contributions. We have learned so much from what you have written, and I'm hoping to take as much as we can from what you've contributed to enhance the projects that are related to the cooperation between political parties and civil society. And as Denis said, yes, in my own experience as well, we have to also think and how to make recommendations to both the EU and other international actors that are present in certain countries and want to enhance this type of cooperation. And for that, first of all, it's important that they make it a strategic goal to work on this, to enhance the cooperation between political parties and civil society. When they put this in the strategy, then the project calls can also be done in a way that through civil societies and established project goals program then include cooperation with political parties can be organized by the CSOs. This can be done, for example, like in the case of Benin that was mentioned here, that CSOs organize capacity building programs for political parties on issues like gender, youth engagement, but also integrity and transparency and sustainable development. Another approach is, and it's really important that the EU and other international actors in certain countries understand and take into account the context of the country. In countries when one political force is very predominant, then CSOs tend to take on the role of opposition, and therefore it's harder to cooperate with ruling parties, not to say sometimes even impossible. And in that case, there are limitations to what can be done, but also there's creates a space for political foundations to try and organize grassroots and social movements that can ultimately become parties. And we've seen these examples not only in other countries, but also within the EU itself, in the examples in Hungary, where CSOs and grassroots movements and social movements had ultimately become opposition parties. There's also occasions where certain CSOs align themselves with the oppositions, while others align themselves with the ruling parties. And we have seen those examples also represented in this publication. And this is actually more similar to what we see in Western democracies. And therefore we have to call for integrity standards to be applied to both sides. And finally, in my experience in a lot of young democracies and developing countries, much like my own home country, for example, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina, CSOs tend to feel the need that they need to have the highest level of political neutrality, which they of course should, but they go one step further and completely disengage from working with political parties, and this makes their advocacy work suffer, because you cannot actually make concrete changes if you do not talk to elected officials and representatives of political parties, because the civil society and elected officials, they are representing the people in two different ways, but only through their cooperation we can have true democratic reforms. And I think the EU and other international actors who work in other countries outside of Europe need to take this into account, that if they plan for a angle of cooperation between parties and civil society in their programming for funding opportunities, we can achieve much more in terms of reforms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmina, for sharing this kind of divisions very often between civil society and political actors. And I also see this fear to engage with parties in quite some countries within Europe. I would like to open the floor, and of course, maybe Willy, you want to address some of the points that have been mentioned, or to analyze a little bit further. Otherwise, I would like to give you the opportunity to come in, to ask questions on the study, on, as I said, the key recommendations to the EU. We will present a little bit at the end, but if there are some questions, comments from your side, please feel free to come in. And Willy, you would like to? Yes. Yeah. So any remark, question to the authors, and yes, please. Maybe you can just give.
Thank you very much. Just to break the ice for the discussion here. My name is Wolf Pape. I'm associated here with CEPS, and I was very fascinated of the different experience in different countries. They're almost contrasting sometimes. For me, the main problem here is we are talking mainly about the national level of democracy here. But in multi-level democracy or multi-level governance, as we see it in Europe in particular, we have to make differences. There are different ways to use democracy here. You can have very direct democracy at local level. Everybody knows what it's about. And you can easily quantify and have majority decision, because you can move out if you have a problem. You go to village B. But this is not the case. The higher you go, and the highest, of course, is global governance. What we see now with COP27 again, where civil society expertise with academics and really ground-based evidence are very influential. And we need that already at European level here, which at national level still is very much in party politics, which I personally criticize very much, because there's a lot of ideology involved still. And there's a pluralism, which is a basic principle of democracy, is very important. And their civil society kind of comes into the gap that the parties are leaving open to action. And I wonder how far we are really able to make this differentiation at different levels of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. We will collect a few questions, please.
Yeah, it works, yeah. Michael McLaughlin's my name. I'm actually involved in the European Economic and Social Committee, so we're involved in civic society, and I work for a civic society organization, a youth organization, but have been involved in politics. As two observations, I suppose, on that base. But in the Western context, I do wonder, very much in the Western European context, that I do accept there's been huge, decline in participation and all this. But I do think it's different between, you might call, the membership level and the activist level. Certainly, I've been involved in both sides, and you still see a lot of activists who are running a sports club, running an NGO, and in a party. But the membership are more, just normal people who don't bother so much, and they may have fallen off. And actually, I did hear it said once by one party leader in my own country that, and it might sound a bit strange, but I wonder how much of a false dualism is it. They said that in an ideal world, a political party is a civic society organization. And you say in the history, this was the case, that people went around, and I think one region maybe that's not so covered so much, where that might still be in evidence, but is in the Arab world, where quasi parties, maybe I'm thinking in Acta in Tunisia, and even the Muslim Brotherhood, is it a political party, is it not? But the party is a social movement, as I think was said by our friend in Bosnia, that the party itself, and I've actually seen this in some Western European countries, that the party is out doing things, providing social service. Now, maybe as a means towards an end, and I think it's a minority thing, but you can see some instances where the separation, and maybe it was what Java said about Kenya as well, the separation isn't always so great. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah. Please, over there. Yes.
Thank you very much for this very interesting introductions, Piotr Kaczynski. A comment and a question. Question is very quick. How do you categorize church or churches and religion? Whether it is CSO, what is it in your study and in your societies, in your political spheres of interacting of different actors? And a comment is along the lines that we already have heard. I'm not so sure that we can accept the notion that Western standards of democracy is the kind of eternal positive view that everybody wants. The Western standard of democracy is a lot of weaknesses, and we see this, how it's evolving everywhere in the West, be it Europe or America. Therefore, all those old paradigms of having 2 electoral cycles and then you're fine are simply crap. And you see it all over the place. In Central Eastern Europe, you see it in Southeast Asia or anywhere else. So this is a comment rather than a question. If anybody can come up with any new paradigm to categorize the transformation processes that were actually even the Western societies that are right now unable to find any golden rule on how to organize themselves, can also benefit from. Maybe there's something in actually outside of Europe and outside of United States where we can fix our problems from your lessons as well. The last comment is a quote. It's a quote from a senior member or senior advisor to a senior member in the European Parliament, who said, European politics has changed in such a way that big movements of the past, social democrats and Christian democrats, they lost their unions and they lost their churches. So those were the social basis for social democracy and for Christian democracy. And now we are all living in this post world of sorts. And I wonder, how do you identify yourself in this new world?
Thank you. Maybe take some.
Can we start answering, because that's too many questions already?
Too many questions, please. Okay, Julio, you want to kick off?
Yeah. Before we forget all the questions, I'd like to address the last comment. I think, yeah, of course. I mean, decolonization is in. It's the in thing right now, right? So definitely, even in academia, Western paradigms and frameworks are already being thrown out with the garbage bin, right? So, but there are certain norms and paradigms that, for example, the long debate on whether Western liberal democracy is conducive to Asian democracy. And of course, this argument by the late Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, that liberal democracy. But if you follow that line, that is tantamount to just forgetting about the value of human rights, and that's exactly what's happening right now. So we can't just drop human rights for the sake of cultural essentialism, right? So it's quite a dynamic struggle, for those who are defending democracy and trying to, as much as possible, protect the remaining democratic space, and those who are arguing from a cultural perspective. So, of course, it's a continuing experiment in democracy, particularly in the Philippines. We've been. Where else can you find the example of a Western democratic experiment than the Philippines? And yet it failed. So we're trying to find our path towards democracy. So how do you categorize the church? Again, the Philippines is the only Roman Catholic country in Southeast Asia. Well, it's part of faith-based organizations, and faith-based organizations are part of civil society. At least that's how we see it back here. And false dualism, of course, it's never as simple as that. But the task of political scientists is to simplify complex matters and to complicate simple matters. So I'm guilty of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julio. Just to add that in Germany, we also accept the definition that political parties are civil society organizations. It's very interesting. So in Germany, we actually use the same definition, and we say political parties. Of course, there are differences, we all know, but still they also try to accumulate societal interests. And this is why at least the bigger political parties in Germany have very big party associations: the women's wing, the youth wing, the labor wing, the employees wing, with huge members in the past. But they are, of course, all in most of our parties dying out. So a lot of parties have, of course, this challenge of membership, of trying to engage with younger generation, trying to have people committed to party politics. This is, I think, similar to many catch-all parties. Billy.
I do not fully agree with this assessment, because there is a huge difference between political parties and civil society organizations, because political parties are fighting for political power, and civil society organizations do not compete in elections. They do not fight for power. They do fight for influence, of course. They want to influence politics. But this is a difference, and political parties, of course, they are presenting candidates and political programs, and they are participating, they are taking over the government and all these functions. I think we have to try to be clear with the definitions. Democracy is not everything. Democracy, in my point of view, at least, is first election of government, and second, control of government. And for these things, you need a lot of other elements. You need respect of human rights, you respect freedom. And if we talk in our days about constraints or problems of democracy, then this refers to the lack of freedom, lack of space for participation, losing control of the government, losing of transparency, accountability. All these are necessary elements which contribute to the functioning of democracy. But democracy, at the end of the day, in my point of view, is a governing system, and this is about election and exercising government. Although in the context of these international meetings, I fully agree with civil society organizations who have been part in the and are still being part of the environmental movement, COPs, and so on and so forth. But this is not necessarily a democratic process. This is a participatory process and a social process. I agree with all those who are pressing in favor of more actions. But at the end of the day, we have also to see that, unfortunately, democratically elected government do not engage enough, and they do not engage even with the support of their electorate. So Bolsonaro has been elected in Brazil 4 years ago, and he did not do nothing in terms of government. And Modi in India is still supported by a huge majority of his country, as appears, but he does also not represent all things we are in favor of. Another point I wanted to mention, and it is also mentioned in the papers, and the authors have indicated this, unfortunately, those civil society organizations we are more sympathetic with, in the political area, are in many cases not so strong, because they have no appeal in their societies, or not a very strong appeal in their society. So human rights groups, groups in favor of transparency, and so on and so forth. These are not the most powerful organizations in many cases, and therefore political parties do not care so much about them, because political parties, as they are looking for power, to those organizations who help them to come to power, they are looking to those organizations who are representing other interests, but political and human rights oriented interests. Unfortunately, but it is, we have to state. And the other point is the fragmentation of our societies, which also, of course, induces a fragmentation of civil society. So we have a lot of organizations, which is very good, which is the kind of pluralism, which is a very aspect of democracy. But on the other hand, of course, it contributes to the weakening of the representation of social interests, and also the weakening of the civil society organizations. And we have, unfortunately, also in our societies, many people do not want to participate anymore. Some people participate in civil society in one issue is actions, social movements, but many people are not interested or disposed to engage in a continuous way in social or political affairs. And this is problematic. If you're looking to the local level, for instance, it's interesting to see that in many countries, political parties mobilize a lot of people. Political parties still have a lot of people in the local councils and so on and so forth. And for all this, you need a lot of people. Many civil society organizations don't have such an amount or such a number of people. But at the local, already at the local level, to be really effectful, you must invest a lot of time, a lot of efforts, you must study the affairs, you must be engaged, and so on and so forth. And many people, for several reasons in our days, are not engaged anymore at this level. And this is a huge problem for the political parties. And sometimes it's easier to engage in civil society organization, one issue actions, but in a continuous way to engage, for instance, in local politics. At a higher level, it's easier because it's less people needed. You have less national parliaments. You have one national parliament. It's always easier to find 500 people, and they're normally well paid. But at a local level, where you need real engagement of the people, it's difficult. And so at the end of the day, political parties also have a lot of candidates who are not really prepared. And this will also produce a lot of damage to the appearance of democracy, the outcome of democracy. And so I think, and this is exactly the point where we need more cooperation between political parties and civil society organizations, because at the local level, we have a lot of organizations. Many organizations are engaged only at the local level. There are normally relatively few organizations with a national appearance, because this needs a lot of organization, a lot of funding and other things. But at the local level, you have a lot of new forms of civic participation, even if it is more action or one issue driven. But there is where political parties must try to link to civil society. And I think that's my observation, that in many cases, in many countries, political parties still are not really involved in kind of engagement with these new forms of deliberation, with new forms of debate, of dialogue at the local level. I think this is a huge area where political parties have to learn to get closer to civil society. And I think this is also an area where organizations like ENoP and others hopefully can engage with the support of the European Union or others to educate or to capacitate political parties to be more involved with local communities.
Thank you, Willy. We have, of course, then I think I give the floor to Yawas from Kenya.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are very important reactions, and even the views that have been given by Professor Hofmeister, Willy. I think when one of the members of the audience or participants asked the question of democracy at the national and local levels, the question that comes to mind is, what is democracy and to whom? Because I think in response and in reflection to that question, the understanding of democracy that we have at the national level, at the academic level, is very different from the understanding of democracy by people in communities or villages in most countries, especially even here in Kenya. Because to most people in the villages in Kenya, democracy amounts to the person that they prefer winning the election seat that they are contesting for, regardless of whether that person believes in anything or not, as long as he has won or she has won that seat. And so I think the issue of understanding democracy, as earlier was said, is that we need to see how to harmonize that really understanding, because the understanding of democracy as it is in the West, as it is at the national level, means a different thing to what other people believe in at local levels or in grassroots or in villages, etc. The thing is that when it comes to issues of activism, yes, some people are activists maybe because they are in the limelight, yes, and they want to use that activism or platform to also get into roles of governance at the national level. How come that some dyed-in-the-wool activists, the moment they get into elective positions, that spirit of activism that they had dies down? The things that they believe in, they will never speak to them or even push for them or implement them. So this activism, is it really an activism that is made of a strong backbone and what they believe in? Because, for example, here in Kenya, when it comes to civil society organizations, they have transformed over time. In the past, civil society organizations were really active and passionate, driven by ideas and certain ideals. Today, sadly, in some civil society organizations, individuals who work in civil society organizations are there just because they want to earn a living or a salary. They don't even believe in a particular cause. So I think I would say that not everybody within the civil society organization at various levels where they work believes in the cause. But you might find that some people, yes, still within the CSOs believe in the cause. Another thing is that here in Kenya, as it is mostly the practice amongst certain CSOs or civil society organizations, they engage in elite discussions in hotels within the capital, but the issue they discuss with, possibly even when it comes to implementation or the actuation of them, they do not really engage with people at the grassroots. So there is also need to see how to enhance the activities of the civil society organizations at grassroots levels within communities, within the various subnational units that have been created at different, in different countries. Another thing is that in Kenya, the other challenge that exists within political parties is to do with party founding. We have got many people that founded parties and cannot be challenged or removed from that party leadership position. That even though in Kenya, for example, we have got a law that provides for political party funding and or financing by the exchequer, and this is dependent on the number of elected officials after a general election, people still hold on to the political party that they founded, one, and secondly, members of political parties, certain members really hero worship the founders of these political parties. And this is seen in the absurdity on how party primaries are conducted. That you may find a very popular candidate in a particular elective area who most of the people who has got certain kind of support, but the party ticket is given to a different individual who is seen to be closer to the founder or the leader of the political party, or who is one of the financiers of the political party. And so you find that now in practice, the real democracy and the democratic practice and tenets are not even practiced by the very political parties or even the leaders of these political parties. Some of them now issue party tickets dependent on who has got much money to finance the party and the party activities. So I think these are some of the challenges that still exist, especially in Kenya.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to add to this? Julio or?
Just a quick reaction. Of course, elections are integral to democracy, but elections are not the end all and be all of democracy, right? You have seen how elections and majoritarianism, or what we call delegative democracy, has been used, to using majorities in elections to diminish democratic spaces around the world, particularly in the Philippines. That has been the case. So from the Schumpeterian perspective, it's the minimum. But of course, there's a varieties of democracy. That's a little plug from our project, also varieties of democracy. But you need to consolidate democracy by looking at the different facets that will enhance it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for this presentation. I have a question that's related to the link between civil society and political parties, and especially to the means that are used by civil society nowadays, because with the advent of the internet, I think the way that civil society communicates not just with political parties, but among themselves, because when any type of group is constituted, that the way that now we communicate is usually through social media or messaging apps. So my remarks or question regarding these 2 points are: first, do you think that there might be an imbalance of power, let's say, between political parties and civil society, in the sense that with social media being such a prominent part of today's society, this might dictate too much the political agenda of our leaders and also of the parties, which is something that sometimes, at least from my perspective, looks like it's prevalent in politics. Like when one topic is very present in social media or mainstream media, then it's also very present in political agendas. And relating to this, that because of this, politics are becoming also very quick. So at the same time, social media and the internet is leading to a fast-paced society. This is leading to very short-term politics and policies as a consequence.
This question is for me.
Yes. One more. Yeah, please.
Mention it a little bit on the contrary of you, who strongly believe in democracy. Don't you think that one of the problems is that our democratically elected government are not elected, but they are co-opted? As Mr. Bigabo mentioned, very often it is someone close to the leader. As a matter of fact, you know it, or you should know it, the leader chose his successor. And so this gives you the reason why the fact that people don't engage in political parties, it's not strange, it is meaningful. That means that they understood that they are just there where it is political parties, whether it is civil society, whether it is any other body who will share the cheese. They are just there to participate because they need a lot of people to go to power. But the fact is that people know that, for instance, if they engage more, if they are the better in a field, if they are the most engaged for the common, but if you are not the sister or the daughter or the mistress, it won't be you. It will be anybody else than you. And so, as a matter of fact, this is a problem of democracies, and it's not in Africa, because you know also that all the cooperation policy, you know very well that there is a double language. When you are talking about development, it's something else. And all, of course, money is the thing everybody wants. Well,
thanks very much, Sam van der Stag of International Idea. Thank you for the great report. Question is, I think the topic is very important of bringing parties and civil society closer to each other. My question is, with what purpose, right? Because I think we may be working along different models in the old European political parties, as you refer to, that have roots in churches or labor movements or green movements, and that allows them for participation and representation from the bottom all the way up to government. What we heard from the presenters here on screen is a different model, right? Where civil society is actually the watchdog of political parties, because political parties are considered corrupt, and they see our parties, and they hold them to account. Or they replace them, where parties are not delivering. We heard that civil society does not even want to get involved in politics, but is doing service delivery where the government or parties fail to do so. So there, the civil society doesn't function as the root, the line with the bottom level, but they replace political parties. So my question, going back to what is the purpose? If you bring civil society parties together, what do you aim for? Is it to create the European model of the rootedness, or is it to strengthen that watchdog function that we heard about, or the service delivery function? I think as long as you have clarity about the end goal, it makes it a lot easier to conceptualize the collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have some reactions on this from the speakers, but of course it depends very much on the function of this civil society organization. Do they provide services for local governments? This also, of course, exists. Are they an advocacy organization? Do they have their own advocacy goals, which they want to bring to the politicians, to the member of parliament? So is it an advocacy NGO who talks to politicians to advocate their? So I think there are always joint interests. For political parties, it's very interesting to learn from civil society organizations, because thematically they are, as we mentioned before, very advanced in research in terms of capacity on specific topics. So I think for political parties, it's a must to connect with civil society, be it at the local level, to learn more how they engage with on local health issues, on local transportation. So because political parties have limited resources and they have also limited funding. So I think it's core to build these bridges and to learn from both sides. And I think there is a natural interest of civil society also to engage with political parties, to bring across their ideas. They have specific lobbying interests for specific topics, and they will find some more open ears from one party than from other parties. But as I said, I think there is a natural way of cooperating. I understand when it comes to reforming political parties, I think also open political parties, they should be very keen to engage with civil society who goes for more transparency of political parties, more integrity of political parties. So I think that's exactly when you have reform-oriented political parties, they should be very interested to cooperate with civil society organizations who have this expertise. But again, then a lot of political parties are afraid. They say, why should I reform? What does this civil society organization has in mind? But I think it's important to really look case by case, country by country. It's of course extremely difficult to transfer these ideas to different. So therefore, I think the EU has to, at the local level, together with local NGOs, political parties like in the Philippines, develop engagement strategies between parties and CSOs. And they might look very differently in Cambodia than they might look in the Philippines or in Kenya. So I think it's important to localize these engagement strategies. If the EU has this kind of idea, they have to design it together with local actors and to see what is the current willingness, what are the current challenges of engagement. So I think it's really case by case, country by country, and it depends, of course, also if both actors see this mutual beneficial benefits to engage with each other. Sorry, I give the floor to Moise from Benin. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As each country here is sharing its experience, I think I also have to go back to some questions that have been already answered and give the Benin situation. First of all, when talking about religion, where do we place religion? In Benin, religion is considered as one of the 7 components of civil societies, because in Benin, we held a kind of seminar in 2007, and we tried to define 7 components of a civil society organizations, and they are the religion, traditional chieftaincies, the unions, the associations, NGOs, the media. Yes, yes. So those are the 7 components, and the religion is one of them. Now, do we consider a political parties as civil society organization? Article 5 of Benin Constitution says that the political party's objective is to win power, which is not the objective of a civil society organization. So they are completely different here in Benin, and that's why it's even forbidden to be a member of civil society, like an active member of civil society organization, and also being an active member of political party. That's forbidden. If you want to shift, then you have to shift like several months before the next election, and then you can compete, you can run as a political party member. Talking about the membership, you know, before you are a member of a party or an organization, you need to adhere to the organization, you need to pay fees. Especially in the case of Benin, you need to submit some files so that they review and then you are accepted as a member. But in the case of Benin, there are many members of the political parties that, I mean, even elected officials of the parties that are not members of the party, which means they just came at the eve of the election, they run under the party ticket and they are elected without being member of the party. And that's not forbidden. Unfortunately, you can position anyone that comes to you without the person being member of the party. But what the law requires here is that to create the party, you need to have at least 15 members in all the 77 communes of the country. That's what is required. But apart from that, you can do whatever you want. And also the other thing is when we talk about people's engagement, you know, in Benin, we don't have like ideology as it is in Western countries. We don't have ideology. Yet in the law, it is written in the law that before you register your party, you need to give your ideology, but it's not mandatory. It's not mandatory, it's optional. So any of the party here can say that they have a clear ideology, unfortunately. So when you don't have any ideology, it means that you are just like going straight. And that's why many of citizens here don't really trust them, because they don't have something to base on to adhere to this party or that one. There's no difference. That's the point. There's no difference among parties, between parties. So that's a situation. In Benin, when we're talking about co-optation, they say that the elected officials are co-opted. It's true, but in Benin, we have started, when I mean the government has started a reform just to prevent those kind of things. Because yes, in many parties before 2018, the president of the party is like the god or the godfather of the party. So he's the owner of that. Now the new reforms is just to allow any member of the party to be able to run under the party's ticket. Unfortunately, we don't have primaries within parties. For now, we still don't have primaries. So at the end of the day, the bureau of the party can just select the people they want to run under the party's ticket. And we head into the legislative elections, and that's unfortunately the situation. We don't have primaries, and political parties, civil society organizations are working for that, so that parties have internal competition, they have internal democracy before they can talk about democracy for the whole country. Now, why bringing parties and CSO together? The experience we have had in Benin the last 2 years is something that is very encouraging, like some shortcomings, they have some insufficiencies, but they don't have the internal expertise to do that. They don't have people to help them to do that. While in civil society organizations, most of those actors have undertaken several trainings with like organizations like EU and others, and they are well trained. And those people can share the expertise with parties. That's something that we have been doing in Benin here, and that's something we're gonna do in the next few weeks while we head into the elections. There will be training of candidates, especially women candidates, by civil society organizations. And that's something we need to do to have like better political parties winning powers, and like civil society also engaging with parties. I think that's very important, especially in the Benin case. Over.
Thank you very much. I think interesting experience. You have, if I understood correctly, capacity building for elected or future elected women in Benin from different organizations. This could be one example. Why not engaging CSOs to train women leaders, young politicians, to include them in such kind of cooperations and build trust also between those actors, which sometimes is not always justified. But of course, I don't know, I think we are coming close to an end. It's already 6:05. I think we had quite an interesting discussion. My last comment, I just wanted to say that, of course, if we look at the overall development cooperation and funding, 25 to 30% goes into strengthening international civil society organizations. And if you look at the OECD DAC numbers, 0.002% goes in strengthening political parties. So we also have to see that there is a gap, and political parties worldwide, as Thomas Gorozas said, are the missing link, because they have weak structures. They very often don't have real funding systems in the countries which sustain them. It depends, of course, on country by country. And especially opposition parties in many country contexts have much less access to sustainable funding. In any case, I think it's important also to not reorient, but to at least think about that in a society, a strong civil society and political parties are both needed to ensure citizens' participation. And it's not the one or the other. And of course, if they can find mutual ways of reinforcing this common interest of joint engagement of citizen participation in a democracy, I think they can do more for democracy than trying to work on separately.
If I may add just a few aspects. First, purpose of collaborating or promoting cooperation between parties and political and civil society organizations. I think civil society organizations can help parties to improve their representation. They can help parties to support or they can support parties for better performance. And in many cases, they substitute political parties when parties are unfortunately not performing properly their functions. If we talk about problems of democracy, I started this with talk, then this is in many cases a problem of political parties, because political parties do not perform properly. If you have a lack of quality of elections nowadays, if Bolsonaro, Trump and others are not accepting the outcome of an election, this is, of course, a serious problem for democracy, and is very much linked to political parties. We have a lot of parties who accept this talk, yeah, the Republican Party in the US, the Bolsonaro Party in Brazil and others. We have so many areas where political parties do not really perform properly their function. And in these areas, I think they need civil society organizations as an element who hopefully can correct. But it is not only needed civil society, but it's also needed a lot of capacity building within political parties. We have to improve women participation, women in leadership in political parties. We have to engage young people. We have to improve communication. Yeah? Not only communicate, but communicate not fake news, but correct news. We have also to educate the citizen, yeah, because the citizen who is sitting on this laptop or phone and communicating with the politician, he's also falling into a trap at the end of the day, because alone he will, this laptop, he is not building a community with others. So we need real communities, we need real civil society organizations, real citizens participating in politics. And I think in this regard, cooperation between political parties and civil society organizations can offer a very high value for the promotion, for the development of our democracies. Yeah.
This was a nice final conclusion. Thank you very much, Willi. Thanks to all the authors for your contributions, for your interest. We will re-engage with you for the country-based interventions and discussions that we have in the next month, one by one with the EU delegations. And we will also have an additional recommendation paper of how to cooperate, what are the benefits for both sides. And we are also very keen to learn more about your specific interventions, especially in the Philippines, but also in Benin. What were your experience of cooperation? So we will definitely reach out to also improve our recommendations with some concrete examples from your countries. So we will definitely come back to you on this. Thanks for your time. Thanks for everyone who has been on, and thanks very much to the team, to the Secretariat of ENoP, not only to organize this event tonight, but also to keep the drive to finish this kind of not easy work, and with a lot of interruptions because of different reasons. So thank you very much for everyone who has been involved to make this publication possible. And as I said, we will have different forms of engagement on the topic within different formats. And if you're interested to learn more about political foundations and their work abroad, feel free to have a look at ENoP's website and social media channels. Thanks a lot, and was very nice to have you here. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Excuse me, will the publication be uploaded online?
Yeah, the publication will be online, I guess,
Yes.
Elka, tonight. Yeah. So we
will be shipping one example to you.
Yeah, maybe it's not so environmentally friendly, but in any case, it will be online. And yeah, and we will in any case re-engage. So I think we have we can have some coffee or some networking if drinks, if you like, to stay a bit with us. Thanks a lot, and have a good night. Thanks to everyone, and have a good night in Asia. And thank you very much for your very good contributions. Thanks.